It will never be a dark enough time. The night will never be dark enough. The society will never be wicked enough in which God's remnant is ever stamped out. Verse 4, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Now, have you ever read that and asked yourself, why is that there? You should ask yourself that question frequently. Why, that verse I just read, why is that there? Did it have to be there? Because it really doesn't seem to even need to be there, does it? It doesn't affect the storyline. In fact, let's take it out. Verse 4, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Verse 5, then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? You see? The story flows just as well without it. So why is that there? The narrator is just narrating a greeting between Boaz and his workers in the field. And I think the reason that it's here is because the writer is beginning to show us something of the character of Boaz. Boaz comes into his field, and notice what he says. The Lord bless you. Using the covenantal name of Yahweh. The Lord be with you. And they answer, the Lord bless you. So we're beginning to see something here of this man Boaz. He comes into his field. He's not the supervisor, the owner of the field that pulls up in the great big long car and then rolls out of the back and puts on the $200 shades and looks out over his field and looks at his balance sheet and then tells the foreman that they need to be producing more and then gets back into his air-conditioned car and moves on. Instead, he is the one who comes to the fields and immediately he expresses this heartfelt desire that the Lord would be with them, that Yahweh would bless them, that His presence is with them as they labor in His fields. And they respond immediately with the same blessing. You just get this sense that there is a relationship that has been cultivated between Boaz and his workers that is something that goes far deeper than just an employer and an employee, or the owner of a land and his kinspeople or his clansmen who are working the land. Instead, you see something of a relationship between employer and employee that is based upon God, that's based upon His relationship with Yahweh and their relationship with Yahweh, and all that is brought out even in the greeting that He gives to them. You get the sense here that Boaz is not the type of man that is a different person on Sabbath and then a different person altogether during the week. And you get the idea that Boaz doesn't have a synagogue personality and then a field personality. But instead, you get the sense that Boaz takes the Lord with him everywhere he goes. And he takes his faith with him everywhere he goes. And as he greets his workers in the field, it's the same thing as greeting the fellow worshiper in the synagogue on Sabbath. Or it's the same thing as greeting a close kinsman. He says, the Lord be with you. Yahweh and His blessings be with you. They answer, the Lord bless you. Wouldn't you just love to work in an environment like that? Some of you don't work in an environment like that. Some of you remember not working in an environment like that. But what an environment to work in when the employer comes and he says, listen, the first thing I want to say to you, before we even talk about how much you've gotten reaped, how much you've gotten harvested, how the harvest is going, I want you to know that I'm praying for you. I want you to know that it is my wish that the Lord would bless you in your endeavors today. Now let's talk about what you're doing in the field today. What a man that we're beginning to be shown here. He said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Now don't forget this context. The context is in the season, the time of the judges. We talked about this on the previous 2 Sundays, that this is the most chaotic, the most violent, one of the most idolatrous periods in Israel's history. This is a period in which idolatry was rampant in Israel. Chaos and violence were the norm. And yet we're shown once again a clear picture that God will always have His true remnant. It will never be a dark enough time. The night will never be dark enough. The society will never be wicked enough in which God's remnant is ever stamped out. The darkest of times in Israel's history, here we're shown this snapshot of a man who loves Yahweh with all of his heart, mind, soul, and strength, and shows that love to those people who are working under his care. And they respond by saying, we recognize that the Lord is with you and we are glad to be under your employment because you are a fair and generous and godly man. And so we see this bright light, this shining light in the midst of the darkest time of Israel's history. The Lord bless you, they say. Then verse 5, then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? He's checking her out. Whose woman is this here? He says. Actually, it's not so much just checking her out. It's more has to do with who does she belong to? Who does this woman belong to? Not in the sense of property, not in the sense that she's a slave, but in the sense of whose headship is she under? Whose family is she part of? You see, this is a day in which all women in this culture were part of a family. And that family was headed by a patriarch. They were part of a clan, which was part of a tribe. And so his question is, which tribe is she of? Which clan is she of? Whose family is she of? I think that he's probably asking that because he wants to know who is responsible for not taking care of her. Because she is a poor person. Apparently she's a widow, and that's obvious for him to see. And yet she's gleaning in the field, so some male in her life is not taking care of her. And I think he wants to know, who is this? Who's not taking care of her? And then he's told, well, and not that, it's that she is a foreigner. Verse 6, and the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, oh, she's not an Israelite. She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. So there's Moabite and Moab twice, as if you didn't understand. She's a Moabite woman who came from Moab. Sort of repeating himself there. You also get the sense here that the reality of her foreign status is something that the writer has front and center. Again, the brackets, the larger point is to just take notice. This is a section that wants you to see she is a foreigner. She is from a foreign land. Everything about her status is she's not one of us. So twice, she's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Verse 7, she said, this is still the foreman speaking, she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So now we want to begin seeing what I think is the point, not only of chapter 2, but one of the central points of the rest of the book. And that's this, that we're being shown here a picture. We're going to see in Boaz a picture of God, a picture of Messiah, a picture of Redeemer. And I know that shocks no one because you've read the story and you've seen for yourself that Boaz is a picture of the Redeemer. He's a picture of the Christ to come. And furthermore, that's something that we see frequently in the Old Testament. We see types of Christ or those who are like Christ in certain ways. David was like Christ because he was Israel's greatest king. Solomon was like Christ because he was the wisest who ever lived. Moses was like Christ because he was the mediator. He was the lawgiver. Abraham was like Christ in his faith. And we could go on and on. And so we're accustomed to seeing people in the Old Testament who are like Christ. And we've seen that in Boaz, and we'll see that more plainly as we go on. But we also see another picture in chapter 2, and that's the picture of Ruth, who is a picture of the church. Boaz is a picture of Messiah. Ruth is a picture of the church. We already saw that in chapter 1. Ruth, who left everything, who left her people, she left her gods, she left her security, she left her identity, she left everything and clung to the God of Naomi. That's a picture of conversion. That's a picture of the church. She comes into Bethlehem, into the joyful harvest celebration, which is a picture of the sinner who leaves their foreign gods and enters into the joyful people of God. So Ruth is a picture of the church. So we're going to see as we walk through this how she is a more complete picture of the church. She is, in fact, ironically, she will be a picture of virtue, which is ironic because she's a Moabitess. Remember how we talked about the Moabite women were in the ancient world, they were the stereotypical loose women? They were widely known for their sexual deviancy. They were widely known for their promiscuity. They were widely known for their harlotry. And yet here is a Moabitess who is going to be shown as the picture of virtue. So let's see this. Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. Notice how she asks. And that's an excellent translation. She asks in a very submissive way, may I please glean in this field? Now, she has a right to glean. In fact, she has a double right to glean because the gleanings are specifically, Leviticus 19, they are specifically for the widow and the foreigner, of which she's both. Plus the fact that she's poor. So in a sense, she's triply worthy of gleaning. And it's not something that she technically has to ask for. It's something that God mandated in His law. Nevertheless, notice this about the character of Ruth. She is not presumptuous. She does not come and say, it's my right to glean. Now, make sure you leave corners for me. Make sure you don't go back over and pick up the things that you drop, because it's my right to have those. Those belong to me, says God. Instead, she asks in a submissive type of way. This is something that the New Testament calls meekness. Meekness is the character trait, is the character quality in which one does not stand upon one's rights. One does not demand what they deserve. Instead, for the good of another, they submit. You see? And so that is the only description in all the Bible of the heart of Jesus is when He describes His own heart to say, I am meek. I am one who does not stand upon my rights. It is my right for everyone in my presence to drop to their faces and worship me. Yet I do not stand upon that right. I willingly give it up. Ruth is something of the same nature here, which she says, it's my right to glean from the field. We're hungry. Naomi and I, we have nothing to eat. This is all we've got to eat, and it's our right. Instead, she comes in the submissive way. Please, she's not presuming upon anything. Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So she came early morning. She's been working all day. There's this phrase, except for a short rest. That is not only notoriously difficult to translate, many commentators, of which they are much more knowledgeable in the Hebrew than myself, many commentators say this is a phrase that's virtually impossible to translate. We really are only taking a guess at what the phrase means. The best guess is something like this, something to the effect that she's been working all day and she just took a short break. Literally what it says is her abode is here in the field and her house is little to her. Literally, that's what it says. So you can figure that out on your own. But the best guess is she's been working hard all day. She's only taken just a short break. But instead, verse 8, then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter. So you begin to hear sort of this endearing, my daughter, that speaks of something that probably is speaking of a difference in age, but also it's an endearing sort of term. It's an affectionate sort of term. Listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. That verb translated keep close is the same one translated in chapter 1 when we're told that Ruth cleaves to Naomi. That's the same verb that we saw, remember in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, and a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife or hold fast to his wife. Same verb here, hold fast. Cleave to my young women. Don't leave this field. So you hear the Redeemer speaking to the church. Don't leave the field of the Redeemer. Don't leave the fields that are your Redeemer's field. Stay here. Cleave to this. Stay in the field of your Redeemer. You begin now to see Boaz as not just provider, but protector. He's going to be even more prominently the protector in just a few more sentences. But you begin to see him as provider and protector. Stay in this field. It's as though you, Ruth, have found the field of great price. You found the pearl of great price in the field. You've sold everything. You've bought the field. Now, Stay in that field. Remain in that field close to my young women. Verse 9, let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. So he says to her, I have given orders that no one is to touch you, no one is to assault you. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go a little bit further. But he issues this protective order. This woman, Ruth, is under my protection. No one is to touch her. So you begin to see here, Boaz is protector and provider. That is something that not only do we see, of course, in Messiah as protector and provider, but that is also something that God has built into the heart of every male. Every male in existence that's created in the image of God has something deep within our heart that tells us we are to be protector and provider. And so if you are a person who has a young male in your life, a young man in your life in any sort of age category, then just bear in mind that that is something to encourage, that's something to promote, to encourage, to nurture that sense of you are protector, you are provider. It is your role to protect the women in your life. So he says, I've charged the young men not to touch you. And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Now, this is spectacular. This is fantastic to see because what we see here is an incredible reversal of roles. Here we see the wealthy landowner Israelite man drawing water for the poor widow foreign woman. It didn't work that way in ancient Israel society. The men didn't draw water for the women. Do you remember Jesus at the well? When he asks the Samaritan woman to draw water for him, the men didn't draw water. Instead, the men are drawing water for Ruth. And not only that, but the Israelite men are drawing water for the foreign woman. Do you see the flip-flop here? Do you see the reversal? Do you see how Boaz is taking the societal order and flipping it on its head? And he's showing to Ruth such a measure of acceptance and such a measure of kindness to say, water will be provided for you. You don't need to draw your own water. You don't need to stop your gleaning to go and draw water. Neither do you have to bring skins of water with you. It will be provided for you. Because we're drawing water and giving it to you. Maybe in your mind, maybe in the back of your mind, you're picturing perhaps another conversation that took place between another man and another woman about drawing water. And maybe you're seeing maybe some threads of connection there. But here's the other thing to see. As he says, water will be provided for you, let's not forget what they are just coming out of. A 10-year famine. Now, what causes 10-year famines? Famines can be caused by things such as insects. We think about the story in the Minor Prophets in which the locusts come and devour the crops. Nahum, that's the name I was searching for. The story of the locusts who come and devour the crops. And so famines can occur from pestilence. But a 10-year famine comes from drought. This is a time in which water is not only precious. Water was always precious in the ancient world. But this is a time in which water was like gold because they're just now coming out of a famine. And here's Boaz saying, we will provide water for you. Think of your Savior, of your Messiah, saying, come to me. I am the fountain of living water. He who drinks from my fountain will never thirst again. Those are the images that we are to see. Those are the connections that we're to make. So he says, let your eyes be on the field where they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? So anything could happen in a field in the ancient world. Same thing is true today. But much more so in the ancient world in which the system of laws, policemen, there weren't safety phones for people to call and emergency people to come out and help people in trouble. Anything could happen in a field. Think of Genesis chapter 4. What happened in a field in Genesis chapter 4? A man lost his life because his brother hit him on the head with a rock. So anything could happen. Boaz is being practical. He's being knowledgeable. He's saying, listen, we don't want anything. I'm the provider. Nothing's going to happen to you. You are under my protection now. Verse 10, and she fell on her face, bowing to the ground. That's the word for worship. So here we're beginning to see there's something about Boaz that's pointing us to something beyond just a man. Ruth falls before him, the same word for worship, and she said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner?" There's a little play on words there. The word for foreigner in Hebrew is literally one who cannot be recognized. So she says, "How have you, or why have you to have favor upon me, one who cannot be recognized? Why have you recognized one who cannot be recognized?" Sort of a little bit of a Hebrew play on words there. But she says to him, "Why have I found this favor?" You hear in her words there this sense of surprise, of astonishment, that she is the object of favor, not only of the people of God, the reapers who will be generous to her, and Naomi and the others of the village, but this man Boaz of the incredible generosity and her astonishment, her surprise. Why am I the object of such favor? So again, you're hearing echoes of the church. This is the voice of the church saying, why have we found favor with God? Why has God been favorable to us? Why has He shown grace to us? We who deserve nothing but condemnation and damnation, yet He has been loving and faithful to us. How can that be? You hear there the echoes of the church. But verse 11, "But Boaz answered her, 'All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me.'" There's the second double verb. Fully told to me. So literally, being told to me, it was told to me. Emphasizing here the telling, the hearing of the story of Ruth and her leaving her family, leaving her home, and coming with her mother-in-law and how well she's treated her mother-in-law. So in other words, what Boaz is saying is, I didn't just hear this once. In fact, I didn't just hear it twice. This is the talk of the town. Everywhere I go, I hear people talking about Ruth the Moabitess. I go down to the market, and people are talking about Ruth. I go over here to synagogue, people are talking about Ruth. I go to the fields, people are talking about Ruth. It's as though Boaz is saying, everybody in Bethlehem is talking about this. It has been fully told to me how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people you did not know before. You hear there, of course, Ruth is the picture of the church. And so you hear there the streams of thought. She left her native land. She left her father. She left her mother. She left everything, just as the Christian leaves everything to follow Him. Just as Jesus will say, the one who puts his hand to the plow, or who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not worthy of me, or the one who does not hate father and mother is not worthy of me, or as Jesus will say in Mark's gospel, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. This is what we see in Ruth. Boaz has heard this, that she's left everything. She's denied herself, she's left that behind, and she has come with Naomi to this land of Yahweh. Verse 12, "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and full reward be given to you by the Lord." There's another play on words there, because the word repay and the word reward are both derivatives of the word shalom or peace. So we can just recognize that and keep going. "So the Lord repay you, and a full reward be given you by the Lord," says Boaz, "the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Now this metaphor, this picture, begins to really take shape as Boaz describes Ruth's coming to the land of Israel as coming under the protective wings of a mother bird. Often in the Old Testament, God's protection for His people, God's care for His people, is described in terms just like that, the caring wings of a mother bird. Take a look with me in your notes. Deuteronomy chapter 34 and verse 11. "Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings and catching them, bearing them up on its pinions." Or Exodus chapter 19, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." It's this picture of a mother bird on the nest, and there's little baby birds, and she spreads her wings in protection over those baby birds. And of course, who can forget Jesus' words to Jerusalem? "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you as a mother hen under her wings, but you would not." And so we see here the imagery. He says to Ruth, you've come under the protective wings. You've taken refuge under the wings of Yahweh.